this report, which is our final product, is to create the foundations needed for addressing the ongoing crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous relatives by fostering collaboration and developing recommendations through the lens of healing, prevention, culture, safety, restorative justice, advocacy, and liberation. These vision terms, healing, safety, prevention, culture, restorative justice, advocacy, and liberation, are really important to the task force. And we're hoping that today you all will have the opportunity to provide us feedback on how we are defining these terms. So if you can look on this side of the room, we've posted up the definitions for each vision term, and we would like for you to read them and provide feedback. We do have post-it notes available for you to comment, make suggested edits to those terms, but we want to define these vision terms with the community in mind. So please feel free at some point today to look at those terms and give us your feedback. And again, these terms is the lens we want to utilize to create the recommendations that will be reflected in the final report. So it's important that we hear your input. So let's talk about the report goals. The task force has narrowed down 2 goals that they want to see from the report. The first one is to understand the scope of MMIW crisis within our state. There are 6 objectives that we hope that we are working towards in order to achieve that goal. The first one is to develop a shared vision and vocabulary for describing and addressing the issue of MMIW. Identify how justice systems are coordinating investigations, prosecutions, and reporting of MMIW cases. Identify the number of open, closed, pending MMIW cases across law enforcement agencies, news and media outlets, community and family member accounts. Identify where MMIW cases are occurring through mapping software. Identifying barriers through testimony of survivors, family members, and professionals, including law enforcement. And then also identifying the existing support services and resources for families impacted by MMIW, both justice-based and healing-based. Our second report objective, our goal is to create the foundations and partnerships to further address the issue. And our objectives that are going to help us to achieve this goal is to identify and build trust with key stakeholders to ensure inclusive and comprehensive input is being collected, convene and gather input from stakeholders through community hearings and surveys, and then outline recommendations from all stakeholders. This report, we see it as a collaborative effort. We can't complete this report without the work of our community members, our stakeholders. So how are we going to meet these objectives? How are we going to get this work done? Well, the first thing that we are working on is we're in negotiations with establishing a contract with the Native American Budget and Policy Institute, and they will assist with us developing our methodology, designing data collection instruments, and doing some data analysis, what Secretary Trujillo talked about earlier. Secondly, we will be hiring additional project staff to assist with research gathering efforts. And then we will also be utilizing our monthly public task force meetings to convene and gather from our stakeholders regarding the research goals and objectives, identify relevant information to be reflected in the final report. Something that we have been working on this past month is submitting information of public records request and a Freedom of Information request to Law Enforcement Records Bureau here in the state, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, tribal law enforcement, and all law enforcement agencies with a significant population of American Indian Alaskan Natives based on census data, or recommended through preliminary consultation with stakeholders and community members. Those requests include, we are requesting all MMIW case data, protocols and guidelines for reporting and investigating cases of missing persons and murders, copies of their reporting tools such as intake forms, complaint forms, and policies related to training officers. So we want to be able to evaluate that information in order to help us reflect it in the final report and make recommendations on how to improve some of those policies and systems. We are also trying to coordinate community hearings throughout the state, and it will gather testimony from survivors, family members, and victims of survivors, as well as service organizations, advocates, and experts, just to help us identify unreported MMIW cases and identify barriers to seeking justice and healing and develop recommendations. Right now, the hearings will be held in Espanola, Santa Clara, Albuquerque, Shiprock, and/or Farmington, and Dulce, New Mexico. The task force members will coordinate with local tribal organizations to plan and host hearings. So we're in the beginning stages of those community hearings. The last data activity we are working on is developing surveys, and these will go out to law enforcement agencies, survivors and family members, and service providers that serve Native victims and survivors of crime and abuse. And these surveys will help us to identify barriers to seeking justice and healing and develop recommendations. So aside from our January working session where we were able to put all of this together, our support staff at the Indian Affairs Department has really been active doing outreach activities. And so this is just an overview of the outreach we've conducted since December to currently. And so you can see we've been sharing updates across the state, and we've been collaborating and reaching out to existing efforts to learn from and just build partnerships to do this work. So we really want to recognize the Missing and Murdered Natives Relative team, who is also here today, and also the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, who've been key partners in just guiding us and working with us on this effort. So what's next for the task force? Like I said, we will be submitting these IPRA and FOIA requests before the end of this month. That is our plan. And then we are also still designing and planning surveys and community hearings in consultation with the Native American Budget Policy Institute and also stakeholders. And we will be planning our next public meeting for March. And at that meeting, we hope to convene service organizations and advocates to learn from them. Any questions? Thank you all. If you have questions or would like to connect with the task force, please reach out to us. I'm Samantha. I'm a project assistant, so I do a lot of the planning of the meetings and just kind of our project planning, and then Stephanie is really helping with the logistics. So reach out to either of us if you'd like to connect with the task force. All right. So next up, I want to introduce Jana Pfeiffer from the New Mexico Human Trafficking Task Force, and she will be presenting their law enforcement findings from 2019.
She's 2018 or 2014?
So we have two additional task force members that just joined us. We have Matthew Strand from the DNA Legal Service, and then we have Becky Jo Johnson from the Navajo Nation. Sorry.
Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Jenna Pfeiffer. I'm with the Attorney General's office. I work in the Special Investigations Division, the Human Trafficking Unit. I'm originally from the northern part of the Navajo Nation. My grandparents are Irene and Ellen Ben from Cajon Mesa, which is near Aneth and Montezuma Creek. I've resided in Albuquerque since 2009. Had 2 kids, my husband and myself live here. So it's been quite an interesting ride in terms of my work and passion in terms of violence against Native women and my journey and so forth. So what I'm going to share with you today is just pretty much the first time I presented on the New Mexico State Human Trafficking Task Force. I'm fairly new when it comes to the Attorney General's office. I was employed the last week of December of 2019, so pretty much going on to 2 months with the Attorney General's office. And really all of this information is just building on top of my knowledge and understanding when it comes to the exploitation of our Native women and our sisters and relatives. My previous experiences was actually with Dr. Linda Sunstone. I oversaw the Human Trafficking Department at First Nations Community Health Source, provided direct service assistance to victims of sex and human trafficking, coordinated efforts with many of our agencies, whether it was LifeLink or the Attorney General's office. So that experience really gave me a wealth of understanding in overseeing how the service provider side has really assisted with our agencies in collaborating with one another. In terms of First Nations, my experience there, I tend to go back and talk about that, and then currently in my role at the Attorney General's office kind of just builds more onto that, where we still continue to assist with sting operations, investigations, and the criminal justice system when our cases come to our office as well. So I've always been a part of the New Mexico State Human Trafficking Task Force for the past 3 years. And so now I oversee the task force and the core collaboration and coordinating the efforts when it comes to our task force. When we talk about sex and human trafficking, I get a lot of questions on like what exactly it is. So when we say the umbrella term human trafficking, we're really talking about 2 components, which is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking, commercial sex act induced by force, fraud, or coercion, in which a person performing the act is under the age of 18. Victims can be found working in massage parlors, brothels, strip clubs, and escort services. labor trafficking using force, fraud, or coercion to recruit, harbor, transport, obtain, or employ a person for labor services, involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, and/or slavery. Victims can be found in domestic situations as nannies or maids, sweatshops, factories, janitorial jobs, construction sites, farm work, restaurants, and panhandling. When we look at the state of New Mexico in terms of, these definitions, my understanding that sex and human trafficking is not a new concept. It actually has been around since colonization, and we know this by the different tribes that have come forward, especially the Jaliscios, how they are descendants of the Native American slavery here in the Southwest as well. When we look at other nations in terms of what they've experienced in terms of their Native women going missing and murdered, some of the few examples would be even the Osage Nation tells their stories of how when their tribe was, when they struck it rich finding oil under their grounds, many of the women became very wealthy. And through that process, there was men that came into their nations and their societies and married the women, and then from there a lot of Osage women were murdered, and the husband took over the land, rights and so forth, those social contracts. So if we not only look at the Southwest, but nationally, these types of stories have always been here since times of colonization. So my commander, Special Agent Anthony Mays, wasn't able to be here. We actually were providing for the past week training and assistance to law enforcement, to Hobbs and Artesia with Homeland Security for the past week. So he wasn't able to make it in today to talk about his efforts since 2015 when it comes to the grant overseeing the task force. And really it was his idea in terms of how the ICAC and the human trafficking come and play with each other. The grant co-partnered with the Attorney General's Office, LifeLink, the FBI, Homeland Security, and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we have other agencies that we work with. It is a collaborative effort between law enforcement and service providers to combat human trafficking statewide. We pretty much use prevention, prosecution, and protection. Through prevention, we work with task force members in terms of providing educational assistance and enhancing and bringing awareness to this topic. And I get this question all the time is some of our communities, even our law enforcement, simply don't know even the basic human trafficking identification in the red flags and so forth. Prosecution, we have a strong legislation and building strong cases through proactive investigations. And that's working with FBI and having Homeland Security with them. And we do actually have quarterly meetings, a core team meeting with FBI, Homeland Security. And through those meetings, we had one in January. We basically outlined the coming year and how we're going to carry out some of our sting operations for the year in terms of how to get some of these individuals who are exploiting our women and children off the streets. And then protection, the victim-centered rescue and long-term restoration. And I think in terms of the protection, that is with LifeLink, the anti-trafficking initiative, Lynn Sanchez, that we have worked with very closely, how she's able to provide that aspect of our task force as well. So it was actually, the task force was actually began in 2015 when Special Agent applied for it and the Attorney General's Office was awarded this grant. And I have to say that it's actually quite interesting, the amount of partnership with law enforcement. And I think that's something that a lot of individuals don't understand, that the Attorney General's Office is, all of our agents are law enforcement and they have years of experience. At some point they may have even found themselves working with it as an FBI or Homeland Security or military have found themselves in this position where they have a really strong background in terms of investigating these type of special cases. And some of the comments that I've heard, even from themselves as well, is some law enforcement find it very difficult to investigate these cases because of the certain tenets that they're overlooking or things that they're not documenting in terms of evidence. And so the AG's office tends to be the go-to office in terms of handling and turning some of these cases off to. So I'd just like to mention the mission and the vision. The mission of the New Mexico Human Trafficking Task Force is to combat human trafficking through a seamless collaboration between law enforcement and services providers with the use of victim-centered approaches and proactively investigating and prosecuting human trafficking cases, and providing a comprehensive, high-quality service to all victims in the state of New Mexico. The New Mexico Task Force envisions a swift and coordinated criminal justice response to human trafficking in which perpetrators are held accountable and in which the rights of the victims of trafficking under the New Mexico state and federal laws are protected. The task force aims to provide a comprehensive network of high-quality services for victims of trafficking and a systemic collaboration between service providers and law enforcement towards the common goal of combating human trafficking in the state of New Mexico. So these are just our partners, the current MOUs that we have with law enforcement agencies that we currently work with in our task force. So if we get a case that comes to the Attorney General's office, and I'll just use an example, if it comes from like Farmington region and they need the assistance of the Attorney General's office, they will reach out to one of our agents. Our agents will be able to assist with that case and oversee some of their investigative procedures and policies that they go by as well. And of course, you can see some of our non-governmental agencies that we work with, such as Spoken For is another example. And lately, our agents have been working very closely with First Nations Community Health Source in terms of some of the cases that the tips and notification that have come to our office as well. So in terms of the task force, we provide, I think one of our most important component is the educational training to our organizations that come in contact with victims. We do have some sudden organizations that pop up and they're providing some type of funds or grants in terms of working with victims, and we want to make sure that they are assisting with them in the right way and connect them with LifeLink or Spoken For educational training. And then victim services, working with identified victims, providing legal and social services, and that's with LifeLink and Spoken For and First Nations. The law enforcement collaborates with agencies on current future investigations, provides officer training and prevention tactics. And then also community awareness is important for us as well, partnering with community events and members to provide some outreach and education on sex and human trafficking. And then protocol, creating and evaluating protocols for task force and the procedures for handling human trafficking situations. I think some of the efforts since I began with the Attorney General's office is I'm noticing some of the slow and lack of MOUs that we have with our tribal communities, and working with some of those service providers as well. And so I think that my supervisor, Special Agent Anthony Mays, would like to continue those efforts to reach out to our tribal communities and how we can partner with law enforcement for educational training as well. And I think one example to note is the Pueblo at Suzuki had reached out to our office a couple weeks ago for a letter of support, and that they are taking a very proactive approach, even though that trafficking has not happened in that community. but not to be reactive, but to have something, a system in place where they are being proactive when these incidences and trafficking occur because of their casino. So I think it's a really, over reading the grant and providing the letter of support, I think that's a really interesting way of addressing trafficking to our tribal communities, especially if you have casino. When you have a casino, you definitely have activity that's going to be coming from outside your community that's going to be coming onto Indian land. So this is just to give you an idea of the human trafficking unit and then the ICAC unit. They work hand in hand with each other. And we're under the umbrella of the Special Investigations Division. So when you get a tip from the Internet Crimes Against Children, it has some type of component with human trafficking. So that's why both of our units work hand in hand with a lot of these cases. We have Special Agent Anthony Mays, who's the commander of both the units. We have 3 special agents in the Internet Crimes Against Children. We have the 3 special agents for human trafficking, 1 criminal analysis, 2 forensic examiners, 2 administrative specialists and coordinators, 1 mental health professional, and 1 electronic detection dog. And that's a picture I put right there. He's kind of like a celebrity, and you can actually follow him on Instagram. It's S.A. Joey at the Attorney General's office. And it's funny because his office is right next to mine, so I see him every morning, and I think he smells my dog too on me. But I think and then the mobile forensic lab is actually within the past year and a half, and that allows us to, when these cases occur, it allows us to really go to the location and provide a very thorough investigation as well. I think one thing is, like, when I got hired, for some reason, my assumption was that the Attorney General's office only prosecutes criminal justice cases, but it's not. We have many departments, and we have a main office in Santa Fe, and then our main office is downtown at the U.S. Eagle. But we also have other examples. It's like Medicaid or Consumers Affairs Department. We have a lot of assistant attorneys and workers in those departments as well. But the Special Investigations Division is pretty much really, it's important in terms of protecting the citizens of New Mexico. And the amount of heinous crimes that we prosecute, they sometimes are the worst of the worst. So I actually handle all of the notifications statewide for the state of New Mexico. When a human trafficking tip comes into the Attorney General's office, I receive them in an email form. I read the notes, I document, and we log them into the Attorney General's database, the information management system. And I printed out an example of how the report comes in. And I just deleted most of the information. I made up Anna, Brad, and used 505 as the number. So I will just pass this around to give an example of how a report comes into the Attorney General's office. And I think it is important when we look at these reports. For 2019, our unit received 234 reports. And so those are the numbers that our agents have to go through. So when I receive them, I look through it. Every month we have an agent who is on call. I quickly forward to them if it has some type of ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children, red flags, and then I forward it also to any of the forensic analysis agents as well. So most of our reports actually do come from the Children's Youth and Family Center. When I go through those reports, I probably would say about 90% of them come from CYFD. And so our office works very closely with Bryce, who's the director of behavioral health there at CYFD. And my understanding is they are starting to develop a youth shelter because that is one of the most highest needs that we are not addressing in the state of New Mexico. In the past, what my understanding was, if a youth was identified through DMST, domestic sex minor trafficking, they sometimes were actually taken to Texas or Colorado, where they had very extensive youth shelters and wraparound services there as well. So the other tips and notification we receive is also from the National Human Trafficking Resource Center as well, the Polaris. So if someone calls that number and they're here in Albuquerque, that report and the case number and all the information that is needed will be sent to our office. And same thing again, it comes to my office, I read it, I see what agent is on call, we send it to them. Sometimes I tend to ask if they've followed up. A few examples, if I've read the report and I've noticed that it is a person of color, especially a Native American victim, I personally tend to go and talk to the agent and make mention that, did we follow up? Did you investigate? Did you call the reporter? Did you, find any leads? So I do like to pay special attention when it comes to those types of reports that come into our office. Talking with both of our agents, and I did invite them today, but because we were out of the office most of the week, they weren't able to come, and they are law enforcement as well. And then we also get case tips and notifications from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Same thing, they come in, I read through them and give them to the correct agent. And then also through LifeLink, the anti-trafficking initiative that is located up in Santa Fe. The other ways that I log this all tips and notification is even word of mouth. Some individuals may actually just call the task force, and I log those into our system as well. And sometimes they even will text Special Agent Anthony Mays. We log everything and document everything that is given to our office. The internet crimes against children, we have 1,318 tips. And then with LifeLink, with our grant that we submitted, our 6-month reporting, their documents stated that a total of 41 trafficking victims were served during this reporting period. Of those, 4 were victims of labor trafficking, 30 victims of sex trafficking, 6 victims of both sex and labor. 1 remains unknown. I have to say that I think my previous experience working at First Nations, seeing that we only worked mostly, a few victims of youth, but mostly worked with adults, and they were your clients that came in off the streets, off of Central, some cases out of state and in-state. I didn't realize the scope and the severity of violence against our children. I think that the ICAC unit, the Internet Crimes Against Children, the types of tips and notification that they receive that number is really high. And when I see some of those reports, they are reports of what's happening here in New Mexico. Our children are being targeted and exploited because they are vulnerable and they need protection here in the state of New Mexico. And that number is a perfect example to show you the amount of tips and notifications we receive from the Internet Crimes Against Children. And that is probably the most easiest avenue for perpetrators that perpetuate these types of violence. How they have access to our children is the internet and online social media. And I can definitely attest to those numbers. And I just want to make note and emphasize that that our children are targeted and the most vulnerable when it comes to being exploited in New Mexico. And this is just a perfect example. when I first got hired on, they were telling me, you do have to attend our search warrants as well. I didn't think it was gonna happen for some time, and then this was the first one the first operation I actually participated in. So I was able to see from the minute we got the tip and the notification when it came to our office, and when we received that notification to when it was being investigated by our agents, how our office handled it to the point of arresting him and him showing up to court. And so the New Mexico Attorney General's office conducted a search warrant on Padilla's tablets and discovered child pornography containing videos and images of a young girl between the ages 4 to 12. Investigators say that they recovered 3 homemade videos, including one where Padilla sexually assaults a young girl, approximately between 2 and 5 years old. Authorities said Padilla's bedroom, which can be seen in this video game tutorials on YouTube, is the same room where some of the child porn videos were created. Investigators said that one video dates back to 2016. It allegedly shows Padilla raping a young girl who was wearing a pink Hello Kitty shirt. And it is unclear how many of the child victims may exist, but the Attorney General's office is still investigating this case. I have to admit, the minute we got this tip and notification, most of the agents from the human trafficking were on it, and quickly the forensic analysis agents also came on the case and were able to have the source that was given this information, obtain some of the electronic devices that came to our office. We have an ICAC room where it's kept at very cold temperatures because of the fact of the amount of data and with the investigating the devices that come in. And they're really quick and swift in terms of obtaining just a simple USB. Even Special Agent Joey, the dog, can actually go into a house and detect a USB if it's hidden in the wall. With some of these perpetrators, they tend to hide some of their devices in the attic or in the walls and so forth. So it just is a perfect example of how, you know, our children are being exploited, and this is a perfect example of this case. And I have to admit, I was really kind of scared, you know, having to wear a bulletproof vest, the procedures of the search warrant, what team I was on, the duties of going in and collecting the evidence and documenting all of that. Being in this individual's house, it does something to you. It makes you realize that not only are we protecting our children, but we're also at the front lines of getting these types of individuals off the streets, because, you know, these children in these videos are still not identified, and our agents are trying to share one of the child's photograph in the area of where this crime might have been committed, and hopefully she can be identified in these videos. And the wife actually did not know of this, did not know of her husband doing this, and it was actually an ex-girlfriend that he was meeting up with. She came in contact with one of his devices that he left in her care. So even under the wife's nose, she didn't even know. Foster parent caught in child sexting sentenced to 8 years in prison. And this is just recent as well. Today, Attorney General Hector Valderas announced that Joshua Silvera, a longtime foster parent from Albuquerque who agreed to trade drugs and money for sex with who he believed to be a 13-year-old girl, was sentenced to 8 years in prison by Second Judicial Court Judge Brett Lovelace following a guilty plea to the crime of sexual exploitation of children by prostitution. Here is a statement from the AG's office. In March 2019, agents with the Attorney General's Internet Crimes Against Children Human Trafficking Unit spearheaded this undercover sting operation by posing as a mother selling sexual access to her 13-year-old daughter online. And I think those operations that we will be carrying out this year, we pick strategically the different locations here in the city in the state where we're going to do the exact same thing where they pose undercover. I'm hopefully trying to figure out how we can maybe do one closer to Gallup and see how those operations will be carried out as well. Tend to have a lot of cases on their southern border in Las Cruces as well, along the Mexico and Texas border. And one of the main things that the Trafficking Task Force has been in talks with and addressing is also how there is a correlation with the oil and the rigs out there in the southern part of New Mexico. We are getting information from law enforcement that there are spikes of human trafficking cases amongst women in that location as well. So if you look at the law enforcement data snapshot, we actually have snapshot. We do work with a consulting firm that helps with these numbers in terms of the 2019 cases that were reported. If you look at just the first top, we have 26 new cases. For sex trafficking, we have 21, labor trafficking, 1, both sex and labor trafficking, we have 4. The types of investigation, reactive is basically kind of like the notification and tip when they come into our office. There is some type of active investigation on those cases that could potentially lead to trafficking. Proactive is basically the actual cases and some type of operation that was carried out from our office because it was a human trafficking ICAT case. Number of confirmed victims, 12. Sex trafficking victims, 8. Labor trafficking victims, 1. Sex and labor trafficking victims, 3. The gender, female is 9, and then male is 3. And then if you go back for the quarterly reports, October, the back page actually starts in January through March. So we started off with 11, and then April through June, it went up to 3, and then July through September went up to 7, and then October to December, we had 13, and then for January, for the entire year, 26. So I think this is something when I spoke to Samantha Walls a couple weeks ago that she had mentioned she was really interested in how do we partner with our law enforcement. Well, as the AG's office already being law enforcement, we already have that trust relationship with them and how we have established a good partnership with them. When we work with law enforcement, we ask them to turn in a quarterly report. And this is just an example of how it looks. And I tend to send these out before the quarterly report is due, and I remind all law enforcement agencies that their quarterly report due for human trafficking cases need to be turned in. And I'll pass that out. Sometimes I try to think of like, how do we better work with one another? I think that we can have agencies come to the task force, the human state task force, they show up and then they leave back to their region or their district and so forth. But that continuous communication with them is very important and vital. As a established task force since 2015, we still have difficulties with that, with our law enforcement. I'm not quite sure if that's something of a suggestion of mandating collaboration and coordination. And as the Attorney General's office, we still have, some difficulties with that. And we are a law enforcement prosecution office that's, head spearheading these efforts on human trafficking task force, and we ourselves are still having difficulty working with our state law enforcement partners and agencies. I think what I'm recognizing is if in the past we did work with them on a human trafficking case, and there are a couple cases from that district in that region, they do turn in their quarterly reports. If there's one that's in a very rural community and they've had maybe one or two, sometimes they forget to turn in their reports to our office. So that can be a little difficult at times. And then when they complete the quarterly report as well, they also tend to not understand the number of cases that come in. And if it's another agency that is also working on the same case, sometimes they even find themselves reporting that same case. So sometimes we actually have double numbers in terms of the reporting. And the other challenge is just providing educational outreach to law enforcement and the importance of training them. And being down in Hobbs and Artesia the last few days, they've made mention how, you know, it's really hard for them to see. We've had law enforcement make mention how they may have actually overlooked human trafficking, especially if they came to a call to a house and maybe it was for loud noise or something. They go knock on the house and maybe notice like 3 or 4 mattress beds on the floor, but never, you know, saw that as a red flag or anything. Or going to another call at a house, realizing that this particular guy is in charge of all of these men. And when something is needed, he called a particular guy out of the house and tells him to go with this individual to work on something. So law enforcement, some of their stories have made mention that in the past they may have actually been in human trafficking situations and did not recognize it themselves.
So training, yeah.
Again, the lack of victim-centered services for youth, that's a huge gap that we have in the state of New Mexico, and CYFD is trying to address that. And I know that Spoken For with the Dream Tree Center as well is trying to work very closely with our youth that are being trafficked. And then, of course, our tribal communities as well. You know, the example of Pueblo, Tasuki, the lack of law enforcement that they have and wanting to take a proactive approach. We recognize the importance and assistance with Anthony Mays and how our agents can assist with our tribal communities as well. And these are just a few upcoming projects and initiatives. It's not all of them. It's just a few examples. We can provide letter of supports for tribal communities. Human trafficking training to Navajo Nation law enforcement. We got a request from Wallace Billy from Chinle area, but we would like to establish an MOU with Navajo Nation law enforcement so that we can, you know, help assist with better investigations in terms of these types of special cases. Project ECHO, the task force, we're looking at a sophisticated coordination with human trafficking core service providers and law enforcement, where we will have a very close, confidential, hopefully meeting, maybe bi-weekly or every month, where when a trafficking victim is identified, we have the main important core service providers in this meeting and making sure services are rendered on their behalf swiftly and quickly, especially housing being the #1 challenge today. And then also working with our partners upstairs in our building, the United States Attorney General's office, and they are looking to hire an MMIW employee for a position that just opened up, and they are reached out to our office and how both of the state and federal can address these issues in missing and murdered Indigenous women cases as well. World Day Against Trafficking. And then also with CVRC, Crime Victims Reparation Commission, they spearhead efforts in terms of what is the definition of having victim rights. that if you're a victim of a violent crime, you have rights to being compensated for being that victim of that crime. And then also House Bill 237, human trafficking and the sex offender changes. That was actually put together by our assistant attorney, Mark Probasco, who wrote the House Bill 237. It's basically to enhance sentencing for our traffickers that come and commit these types of crime in the state of New Mexico. It being currently a third degree for their first time offense is pretty much a slap in the face for victims, where we are not giving them justice in terms of their perpetrators that commit these types of crime. And also for the youth, if they commit, the bill also mentions that if they commit, a trafficker commits this against a youth, that it will be considered a first degree offense. So those are gaps that we are recognizing within our own criminal state statutes as well. And then also if you are a sex offender in another state and you come to New Mexico, we want those perpetrators to also be held accountable and then put on the sexual registry list as well. So I'm really excited to continue this work. However, our office can be of assistance with you. I think one of the main things the task force is working on in terms of the data collection, I think that would be important for us to also, our office, to review those cases in terms of when a Native American woman comes in our office, how are we handling and surveillancing, overseeing those special cases. The experience that I had working with sex and human trafficking victims has been very important and helpful in my current position. And I always remember one particular victim that I worked with. She had made mention of how, as she was completing an intake and talking, and she's there with her child who was trafficked, and she said to me with tears in her eyes and said, you know, why is it our Native women worth more on the streets? And to me, to this day, that quote sticks with me. And I want to change that narrative, and I don't want us to be seen in that light or in that way. That we do have these beautiful services, and you know, thinking about TOL Women United, the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. You know, some of them are not service providers, but the amount of these healing services, of being a support and an ally in this movement, is very much important and crucial for our community members, because they are the ones that are going to be the eyes and the ears to see something, to speak up and say something. You would be that nosy auntie or that nosy mom or sister and so forth. So I thank you all for listening to me. If you have any questions, I'll be here for the remainder of the meeting.
Thank you so much, Jana. We really appreciate the information you shared today, and that quote at the end. I think it'll stick with all of us moving forward. So Jana will be here today. I would highly encourage all of you, especially those who have questions about the Human Trafficking Task Force and their findings, to interact with her during the lunchtime period. And at any point when we have a break or an opportunity to connect with one another.
Samantha, I forgot the last slide has my contact information.
Okay. I'll leave it up there. The next presentation, our speakers, is going to be from the Department of Public Safety. We have Lieutenant Mark Soriano and also Regina, I hope I'm saying this right, Hacon. She is the supervisor for the Amber Alert Coordinator in Missing Persons Clearinghouse, and they will be talking about just their policies and procedures around missing person cases and how that is reported. So we can have them come up and further introduce themselves.
name is Regina Chacon. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Law Enforcement Records Bureau. I'm also the Amber Alert Coordinator for the state of New Mexico appointed. And Lieutenant Soriano is also, he's a co-Amber Alert Coordinator.
Yeah, so I'm Lieutenant Mark Soriano, New Mexico State Police. I've been employed with the State Police for 14 years. Current assignment is the Public Information Office for the New Mexico State Police. That's pretty much me. I work closely with all the districts, what's going on. Anytime you see any messages being pushed out by the State Police through the media, or any messages that are on our Facebook pages, I supervise our social media portion of it too. But I work really closely with Regina when it comes to missing persons and records.
I'm going to give you a little bit of background on what the Law Enforcement Records Bureau does, because I think that in listening to the previous speakers, there's a lot of the services that we can probably help with in this journey with the task force. One of the programs that we manage is the Sex Offender Registry. And the Sex Offender Registry is crucial when we are helping law enforcement identify suspects in the human trafficking arena. The other one is uniform crime reporting, which will soon be the national incident-based reporting that we have to be in compliance with by January of 2021. And the reason why that is going to be important is because one of the messages that I'm also hearing is information sharing, statistical gathering, information that we can share amongst each other to help us identify where the needs are really not being met or need to be given more attention. So we can help with statistics around the state, because all law enforcement agencies are required to submit their arrest data, incident data to the Department of Public Safety. The next one is that we're tasked with the criminal history repository, which means that every single person that gets arrested in the state of New Mexico is housed in our bureau. We have an automated fingerprint identification system, so it's biometrically matched to each person. And so that will also help in this endeavor to help to identify the arrests around the state, who's being arrested, what are the crimes that are being charged, and then we can follow it through the district attorney's office and through the courts. And so I wanted to give you just a little bit. We manage 23 criminal justice programs around the state, but I wanted just to give you a few of the programs that might help with this endeavor. And the Department of Public Safety, the Law Enforcement Records Bureau, we're always here to help. The one that I'm here to speak about today, along with Lieutenant Soriano, is the Missing Persons Clearinghouse. We were tasked statutorily to manage the Missing Persons Clearinghouse. The sole purpose is to liaison with law enforcement resources for the families themselves when there are tension between the families and law enforcement. Not that law enforcement does anything wrong, but sometimes the families expect certain responses, and law enforcement can't always give those responses. So our job is to do a sort of conflict mediation to manage that relationship. And so we will filter the information that law enforcement has to give the families the type of information that they need to at least let them know, look, law enforcement cares, they are working on it, they're not going to be able to tell you everything, but this is what we can tell you. We'll also manage the resources that they may need for therapy, for counseling, for coping mechanisms. We help law enforcement with manage the resources if they need search and rescue. We have brought in search dogs from other states when our
when hours weren't available. We will coordinate with other law enforcement agencies for the use of their helicopters or any other type of vehicles or anything that they'll need. But that's really the Missing Persons Clearinghouse, the core task of the Missing Persons Clearinghouse. The Missing Persons Clearinghouse also is the statistical, the reason why it's called a clearinghouse is because it's a statistical repository of all missing persons. So in the statute, what is the requirement is that law enforcement is required to fill out a form and send it to the Department of Public Safety as soon as a person is reported missing. What the department has done is created an interface with the National Crime Information Center, with NCIC. So as soon as a missing person is reported into NCIC, which is by federal regulation immediately, is their term, immediately, then the clearinghouse will receive it. It's put into a staging table, and we're able to view every missing person that is reported to law enforcement in the state of New Mexico. The benefit to that is that we're able to see that information and be able to reach out to law enforcement. So if there's a law enforcement agency entered a missing person into NCIC, has no idea what to do with it, we see some imminent danger or criteria that might lead to the alerts, which Lieutenant Soriano will discuss, then we'll reach out to the law enforcement agency and say, hey, do you need help? Do you want an alert? Do you want us to help you with any resources? Let's look at your NCIC entry. Could there be more information? And that is just for us to let them know that we're here to support. We don't take over cases. We don't tell them what to do. We just make sure that they're following the laws that were put in place to create a best practice to investigate missing persons. And then we're out. And if they say, nope, we don't want an alert, we don't want your help, we're good, we have it under control, then we say, okay, we're good. If they say, well, we think it's a good idea to explore an amber alert or a silver alert, the first call we make is to Lieutenant Soriano. And we start having a discussion on how we can help the law enforcement agency. And at that point, then, it's really just a communication and information sharing point. So we really are here to serve you. We are really here to serve the public, and we know that, and we're honored to be able to do that. Missing persons is all missing persons, all ages, is just so important to really bring to the forefront. And I've been working in the clearinghouse for Law Enforcement Records Bureau actually for 23 years. And in that time, I've seen the attention to the missing persons effort really just bloom. And it's just so encouraging, and that people are really taking it seriously. That you don't have to wait 24 hours to report someone missing. You don't have to, it doesn't have to be over the age of this or under the age of that, and really just getting that message out there. I think that's also something I would ask the task force to really make sure that we're letting everybody know. There's no waiting period. There's no circumstance. There is no reason to wait. And even though you're like, well, she's run away before. No, and it doesn't matter, because what we say is that leads to the human trafficking, and all of the studies and research that we've done with human trafficking, they're running away from something or they're running to something. And it's important to make sure that we are on top of it. And what's the worst that can happen? She comes home, he comes home. That's not the worst that can happen. So law enforcement, you're not wasting your time, you're not wasting your resources when you have a runaway who is a chronic runaway, is what the term is. And so please make sure that you're paying attention to those type of cases, and that you are listening to the parents, the guardians, the friends, the aunts, the uncles, the coworkers who are saying, you know, it's not like them to not come to work. It's not like them not to come home or to call me. Just take the report. It doesn't hurt. So that's my message, but I'll let Lieutenant Soriano speak now.
I forgot to say, but thank you guys for allowing us to present to you today. I think it's important to understand that these missing persons alerts that the clearinghouse issued in DPS and state police, it's a resource to law enforcement, and we all have the same goal at the end of the day. We wear different uniforms, but we're all on the same team, right? So these alerts, they engage the community. Whenever we issue an alert, it's to notify the community that we have somebody missing. So they pay attention, right? That's the goal, right? A safe return home for our loved ones, okay? So we're dedicated. I want you guys to know that we're dedicated at State Police and DPS as an available resource to support the safe return of our loved ones. And anytime, every day, like officers out in the field, the guys out in the field, they're actively working to stop the human trafficking. And if there is a loved one missing, they're actively working to bring that or have a safe return home for that loved one. So Amber Alerts. Let's talk about Amber Alerts. So an Amber Alert, there's three criteria for an Amber Alert. Okay, the first one is a child under the age of 18, okay, has been abducted. All right, that's the first criteria. The second criteria is the child is in imminent danger of great bodily harm, or serious bodily harm, or death. And then the third criteria is the specific information available about the child or the child's abductor that may assist us with an expedite the successful or end the abduction. Okay, safe return. Those are the three things. So Amber Alerts, what we need to understand when there's a missing person case in the middle of the night, they always happen in the middle of the night. Like they never happen during the day, and when they do, things work smoothly because everybody's at work, right? In the middle of the day. So if I like walk around, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me like this?
No.
You guys hear
Use the
me?
mic.
Okay.
Yeah, use the mic.
Yeah, I don't want to hold it like I'm a DJ, but you're a rapper, right? So they evolve, right? So the first thing that comes in is the call gets dispatched to officers, right? So an officer responds to the scene and takes that initial report. The time starts ticking at that point. So we have the information. There's things that are going on simultaneously. We got to get that child entered into the system, and at that point to see as a missing endangered at that point, right? EMI or EME. So, but that officer's out in the field, right? So we have to utilize our resources, okay? So one officer, he or she's gonna be consumed with that investigation. So once that information gets entered into the NCIC, the missing persons clearinghouse actually gets an email or a notification that says, hey, we have this endangered child. At that point, the law enforcement agency is either reaching out to me or the clearinghouse is reaching out to me. And the three things that we talked about, right, that I said are mandatory for an Amber Alert, those are the three things that I ask law enforcement. If it meets that criteria, then we're gonna hit send on an Amber Alert, right? So the three things, right, child under the age of 18, child's in imminent danger, and we have specific information to end a safe return, right, to end that abduction. So like I said, these cases are evolving, so a lot of the times, like you guys, we'll see it on the news, right? We'll see that the child went missing at like 6 a.m. The Amber Alert wasn't issued till 6 p.m. Well, there's a lot of things that happen between there. When the actual parent reports the child missing, when officer arrives on scene, and when the investigation's going, and what information we have to issue that Amber Alert. So it doesn't always happen within an hour or 2 hours, right? So that kind of a short explanation of why we don't see it expedited like that. We'd like to see it right away, but we don't always know about it right away until the report. That's pretty much it about Amber Alerts. Then we have Silver Alerts. Silver Alerts are when an individual's over the age of 50, and they have a clear indication of irreversible deterioration, such as Alzheimer's, dementia, some sort of medical condition. Similar, so whenever that's issued, whenever we take a report, we have that information, we enter that person into the system as a missing endangered. Law enforcement will either, if it's the state police or if it's another agency, they'll reach out to us, we'll send out a missing endangered advisory. You guys see them all the time, unfortunately. But those alerts, just as important as an Amber Alert, right? Our main goal is to get that person back safely to their family. And then the last alert I want to talk about is Brittany Alerts. So that's somebody who's missing, who has a clear developmental disability, and that person's health or safety is at risk. So same thing, we're going to enter that person, law enforcement agency's going to take the report, we're going to enter that person into the system, and then we're going to contact New Mexico State Police and or the clearinghouse if the resources needed to send out that alert for a quick return. Now, New Mexico State Police isn't the only agency that issues out these alerts. There is other agencies that issue out the alert. Albuquerque Police Department does it for themselves, Bernalillo County. But Amber Alerts all come through the New Mexico State Police. It's a one-stop shop. They have to come through and talk to either me, Regina, or my 2 officers. And then lastly, everything that we kind of went over today is online, and it's public record. You can go on a search engine, whatever search engines you guys use on the internet, and you can Google. I'm using Google. I'm not getting paid by saying Google. Anyways, you guys can get on the search engine and search NMDPS policies and procedures. And when you go to our policies and procedures page, you'll look for OPR 43, and that's our missing persons policy for the New Mexico State Police Department of Public Safety. And all the information we went over, I didn't make up, I promise. It's in law, and it's on our policy and procedures. Thank you, guys.
So those are the alerts that you see mostly on TV, right? Channel 7, Channel 13, Channel 4. Those are the ones that you'll usually see. But we want to ensure you that there are other alerts. We have one, and it's called the Endangered Person Advisory. And New Mexico was the first to enact that into law. And the reason why we did is because we felt that it was important to, if a person wasn't, at the time there was only an Amber Alert. And the reason New Mexico was also one of the only ones, we were in the top 10 in the country to have a missing persons clearinghouse for all persons, all ages. And so there was an alert for children, but there was an alert for everybody else. There wasn't an alert when there was imminent danger, right? And when we think of imminent danger, they're going to die, and it's just it's horrible. They're in imminent danger to themselves or to others, or they have a gun or a weapon, and they're going to use it somewhere else. So an endangered person was created to help with all of the other missing person cases that were just as important. We wanted to get the word out there. It was just as important for them to be brought home. And so that's the one that is kind of the catch-all, just in case, if they don't meet that other criteria, we don't want anybody to think, or law enforcement to think, there's not another way to get that information out. We'll get it out. If it's important to law enforcement, if it's important to the family, we'll get it out. We'll get that information out. I also wanted to end with a stat. There's 437 missing persons currently entered into the National Crime Information Center, and there are only 18 unidentified bodies or remains. And the reason why I want to bring that stat out is because if we don't know that the person is missing, if we don't know that the person is entered into the National Crime Information Center, then we don't know. And the National Crime Information Center actually has a very good search mechanism to be able to draw a bridge between people that are missing and people who are entered unidentified all over the country. So it does an algorithm every night that says, hey, there's a person that meets this age criteria, this, scars, marks, tattoos, last seen wearing, that information, and it will do an algorithm match every single night. And that's why it's so important to get it entered into NCIC. And the other database that we use that I would be remiss to not mention, because it has been a very good tool to us, which is the NAMUS, the National Missing and Unidentified Person System. And currently, last year there was a House bill that Representative Joseph Sanchez sponsored, and it was passed. And we took, it took us a little bit to get all the information sent to NAMUS, and it was the first for NAMUS. NAMUS had never had a state that wanted to send everything to them electronically. And we said, here you go, here's our database, have fun. And we were like, yay, let's get it in there. And they said, whoa, we've never done this, so let's try and figure it out together. And we worked with them to figure out how to get our data into their system. And there were a couple of fields that they wanted to make sure that we had in the system, and we said, okay, we'll get that information in there. And that took a little bit, but December 3rd was the first of the transfer of all of our missing persons data. And so every week, every Wednesday, I don't know if you guys know the exact day, but every Wednesday morning we hit the send button and it sends a data transfer to NAMUS. And they enter all of the data into another database, which is a public database for anybody that can that wants to look at it. Family members can submit DNA, mitochondrial DNA, paternal DNA. They can submit more information if they say, well, law enforcement saying that she was wearing blue jeans and a black top, and the family saying no, she wasn't. She had this jacket that she wore, and it had this pretty flower on it. Exactly. And they can submit supplemental information. And we have an agreement with NAMUS now that any supplemental information that's submitted, it'll come back to the Missing Persons Clearinghouse, so we can make sure it's documented in New Mexico as well. And we're very dedicated to information sharing. We're very dedicated to making sure that the quality of information on missing persons is accurate. So thank you all for allowing us to speak on the Missing Persons Clearinghouse and the alerts and the work that we do. And I think I was surprised Lieutenant Soriano didn't tell you the story, but we actually were up at 2 in the morning, 2:30 this morning, and we had a possible Amber Alert. And so all the work that Captain Velasquez and Lieutenant Soriano, the Mexico State Police, the Department of Public Safety is really here to serve you. And so we want to thank you for inviting us, because this is important to us, and we can feel how important it is to you guys. Thank you.
thank you all so much. We appreciate that. We actually have some time for questions, if that's okay. So we do want to open up to task force members and our public attendees to ask questions. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand and I'll come by and give you the microphone. See you over here.
I want to know if it's mandatory.
Yeah, and if you can just say your name before you speak.
Oh, good morning. I have one question. My name is Niski Yatsati. I'm with Navajo Nation Missing Persons and also MMDR. You said that entering all these MPs into NCIC. Now my question is that mandatory for law enforcement to do that with every case?
Yes, so it is, and that's a federal regulation. So all law enforcement is required to enter all missing persons into NCIC, and their language in the federal regulation is immediately.
Does it interface with NAMUS?
Let me give you the kind of how the flow works. So the short answer is yes, but there's a way that it does it. So NCIC, whatever's entered into NCIC, remember, if it's within the New Mexico boundaries of our ORI, we'll receive it here in the clearinghouse. Once we receive it in the clearinghouse, it becomes part of our record. That's part of the data transfer that's sent to NAMUS. So it's through the vehicle
So
of
NAMUS
yes,
entering
but yes.
cases. Yeah. Okay. And that includes tribal, correct?
It
Tribal
does.
law enforcement?
Yes, and we've worked with the Navajo Nation on allowing them to have complete access to our NCIC, to our Criminal Justice Information System, and because I know there's been some communications or some issues in Arizona and Colorado, and we just said, look, just use NCIC, we'll figure out everything else. We'll figure out the auditing, we'll figure out how to do all of it. So here, just use our NCIC. I'm also the CSO for the state, so I authorize every single law enforcement office, or every single law enforcement agency to have access to NCIC.
Oh, excellent. Thank you guys so much.
Any other questions? Just give me a little bit of time.
No, there should be no excuses because a lot of them are not being entered.
Be sure to
And the
state
thing
your
about
name.
that is she says that window opens up every Wednesday. So
Wednesday
she
morning.
says it, so you have a whole week.
So I'm
But
Amber Cadis
MPD
Marcotti with the
doesn't
Navajo Nation
Yeah,
Council.
they don't.
What I think in terms of your report, what I didn't hear was how many missing natives do you have in your system? And as a task force, that's what we're looking for. As a Navajo Nation leadership, I can't tell my people how many are missing. And so if you could provide that information. The other area that I was looking at, if you're the program for families to interface when they're moving along, trying to find their relative, where are your offices located? Is it just here in Albuquerque? Because this morning it took me about 3.5 hours to get here. And so if I'm helping community members on an active missing case, I need a bridge to get them what services you're providing. And also the last thing is when we're talking about county, cities, and then tribal, what are some of the best practices that you've worked together to make sure when we go back and have these conversations that that's actually being implemented? We're trying to start a Navajo Missing Persons unit within the Navajo Nation, either police department or PD or criminal investigators, and at times our families are not completely comfortable just working with law enforcement. And so we're trying to bridge that and bring up trust. So if you could provide that information, thank you. And I just have to kind of push back too in your statement that law enforcement doesn't do anything wrong. I almost was like at the end of my seat and saying, if we can step back and say, what can we do better?
Yes.
And what are the 5 steps that we can do to bring your families forward?
Yes.
That will be helpful for all of us who are not in law enforcement and trying to crack the code on how to work with people with badges when they're seeing so much, but trying to deal with a family and a community that's just broken because they can't find their grandma. Thank you.
So the first one is the statistical on Native missing persons. We are unable to track that specifically because historically, if you look at the reporting mechanism that for all incidents, that there's not a mechanism to track on the ethnicity, or if they're Native or if they're non-Native. And so right now, that's what we're working on. We're working on a way to how to identify, in the missing persons clearinghouse specifically, we're trying to keep our scope very, very small in that sense of if we see it come in, what is the best practice to reach out to law enforcement? If we see it coming from a tribal ORI, then, because that's how everything is tracked to us as ORI, then, do we reach out and ask them what the affiliation is, what the tribal affiliation is? So right now we're trying to develop that because there hasn't been anything. And law enforcement it's this or that. So if you look at the documents that's required for law enforcement to submit or the databases, it's really, you submit the race and or the ethnicity at times because that's not a mandatory field in the system, and that's really it. So we're working on that. Last year it was brought to our attention that that was when we started hearing about the task force, and that possibly would be a need, and so we promise we're working on that. We don't really know how to make that identification, and sometimes tribal agency, that the first thing that we can think of is tribal agencies. So I would ask the task force to help us identify maybe criteria. How would we know when to as a clearinghouse to reach out and say, is this what's the tribal affiliation? Is this Native or non-Native missing person? And then be sensitive to the answer of we're not going to tell you, or because we can't really make it mandatory either. So that's the first one. And the second one is you're talking about best practices and how we can help with that on the bridging the liaisoning with the families. So our office is in Santa Fe, but I can tell you that we have a staff in the clearinghouse there's 4 people altogether. And I'm on call 24/7, and I have traveled all over the state on missing persons cases, on Amber Alert cases, on non-Amber Alert cases. I've had multiple meetings with law enforcement, with families. I will sit down with the families, and so we dedicate that. That's all we can do. We can't regionalize it. We've actually worked with state police because they're everywhere to help them understand the resources and what they can do. But the very first step is reaching out. We have a 1-800 number, and I'm happy to give you guys my cell number, which is on 24/7. Obviously, right, 2:30 in the morning, and we're working on that. So, but that's really the first step, and I'm happy to sit with the Navajo Nation and talk about what we do as the clearinghouse, because the clearinghouse is the unit that you're really looking for. You're looking for a repository of data to liaison with the families, to liaison with law enforcement, to have a one point of connection to all the other resources. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, we're in constant contact with them. And so I really think that what you're looking, I'm not trying to impose ourselves, but we are happy to give you the best practices of the clearinghouse and our statute and what it allows us to do. It allows us to go to dentist's office and teachers and schools and say, give them to me, right? Give me these records. I need a photo of this child. I need the dental records of this person, and it's really helped us in a lot of situations. So what if I'm hearing correctly, I think it's the clearinghouse, their practices, their business practices that might assist you. So I'm happy to meet with you at any time. And Lieutenant Soriano and Captain Velasquez, I'm sure, anybody, and Chief Johnson, Secretary Shea, this is very important to all of us, so we're happy to meet with you. And I want to address the comment of, law enforcement doesn't do anything wrong. I'm a civilian. I am not commissioned. And so, I'll make that very clear. And so I understand the issues that law enforcement faces, and I see both sides of it. Because there are times where, we'll be, and I think the Amber Alert last night was indicative of that. We understand the challenges that they're facing, but we also understand sometimes they're not necessarily taking the steps and performing the investigative process that they need to ensure that we're getting all the information we need. And so we have a curriculum at the Law Enforcement Academy that we'll also share with any law enforcement agency, with any entity that wants to see it on how to investigate missing persons. We have checklists that we've created for law enforcement. Hey, have you checked this? Have you seen this? Have you done this?
Because they're
Have
definitely
you
not going to
contacted
take
this
a call
person?
from
Have you made
There's
sure
a
of this?
hierarchy
And
within
so
the
we
network
try
that has
to take those
approve
steps
that before
because
it
we
goes
do
out.
understand that. I was trying to be sensitive and nice to law enforcement, but we have seen that. We do see that. And we sometimes firmly but nicely, and professionally, we've tried to push back on them and saying, no, you guys aren't doing what you need to do to find this missing person. But then we also hear, well, just like the last night, the officer was like, I got called to another call. You have a missing person. But then we have to realize they have 3 officers on one shift to handle a large area. So we need to, we're trying to be empathetic to that. We're trying to understand that, but we're trying to, sometimes get the information that we need and help them be the best investigators they can be on missing persons or on any other case. So I hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much for offering that.
And so we have time for one more question, and then we'll get into our first break of the day. Please state your name.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good morning. My name is Brenda McKenna. I'm a field representative for Congresswoman Deb Haaland here in her district office. And she, the past year, has written a lot of legislation for missing and murdered Indigenous women, and now, of course, we know it's people. And so I'm here to help her learn if there's any federal fixes that could help close the gaps on your need and what you're doing. And one thing I was not clear when it came to the question of you're unable to track natives who are missing. And I'm curious, when you said it's not required to submit the race, ethnicity, did I hear that correctly? Okay.
No, ma'am. What isn't required is the tribal affiliation and ethnicity. The race is a required field in NCIC and with all other offense incident reports. The state uniform incident reporting system does require race, but ethnicity is optional, and we absolutely don't have a field for native or tribal affiliation.
So is this a software problem?
No, ma'am. It's a really just it's a business problem, and it's a requirement problem. So I think if I could offer any assistance with that, I think it would be to make it a requirement through the National Center of Information, the National Crime Information Center. And we would do anything to change the NCIC or anybody who knows federal databases. You have to do it through federal regulation, and to make it a mandatory field.
So very good. So this is something that she could look into then.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for your questions. I think they're very helpful, not only to the general public, but to the task force as we think through recommendations on how to really increase the support and resources from the state to fix some of these gaps that we're seeing in terms of data collection and information sharing and reporting. So this has been helpful. We are going to have a 15-minute break, so we want you all to be able to stretch a little, use the restroom, do what you need to do, and then we will reconvene at 11:15.